Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Book of Life, letting everybody into the webinar. And it's a very special day for myself and my colleagues, Rabbi Zweiback and Rabbi Gewurtz, to be here with our beloved friend and colleague, for me, my mentor, somebody who's inspired me for so many years and continues to through what was really such an unanticipated, bleak, dark, difficult channel. And it is Dr. Larry Brilliant, who, for me, as I said, we began together before the pandemic. Dr. Brilliant came and spoke and prayed and taught and laughed with myself and my two colleagues in Bolinas on our retreat, and told us that this was going to be a reality. And so you started out with us. You were so generous and spoke to us at the beginning of the time that we were together at the Book of Life. And now you've joined us again. And I know many people with us today would like to believe that the pandemic is over, quote unquote, or that things have really changed. I know that you don't have great news on that front for us, but you're always inspiring, Larry, and you always live up to your namesake. Dr. Larry Brilliant, for those of you who think he's just a good friend of ours, is a brilliant doctor, was so instrumental in the World Health Organization in defeating the smallpox epidemic. He traveled all around the world, saving people's lives, founded the Seva Foundation, which has ensured that people are not dealing with the blindness that is so much also an endemic part of being in the developing world. He is one of the chief pandemic correspondents during this time on CNN for this pandemic, and has been the executive director of the World Pandemic Council. He's a brilliant human being and a mensch, and we're just so glad that you're taking the time. I know still an incredibly busy time for you, Larry, but the highest praise that we have for you is that you are such a mensch and you're here with us to talk a little bit about this year and hopefully the future. So the first question, I want to say not only my gratitude to you, and I will also apologize because I'm at an airport. I'm going to jump off, and Matthew and Yoshi are going to take over the brilliant interview, is a question that we've all had to really hearken and to deal with internally, which is, how has this year changed you?
It might be better if I unmute. Thank you, Rabbi Sidley. Thank you, my friend. It looks like you're at a post office. Those are post office boxes behind you.
I'm at an Alaska airport, and in Alaska, everything's the same. It's like a grizzly station, a post office, they're COVID testing, and it's also an airport. So it's a big place with very little infrastructure.
Well, it's nice to be with everybody again. I love the last Book of Life gathering. And I loved our gathering in Bolinas, which was really right on the eve of the beginning of this pandemic, or before we even knew that it was a pandemic. I mean, if we're honest and we look around at our family and our friends and the people that we work with, do we know anybody who doesn't have PTSD? Do we know anyone who has been untouched by a death in the family, someone sick, someone losing their job, or being overwhelmed by the pain and the sorrow that they see all around us? I mean, you know, it's 600,000 plus deaths in the United States this week, which is about the same number of deaths in the United States during the Great Influenza in 1918. It's such a great effect on us that they just published the life expectancy projections, and life expectancy in the United States has gone down 1 full year for everyone because of this pandemic. And worldwide, we've passed 3 million people who have died. And that's really an undercount that might even be an undercount by tenfold. India has admitted that they've undercounted the number of people who died in India by at least 2 million just in that country alone. So it's been horrible. It's been difficult, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. And if you think back to the very beginning, when there were some beautiful moments, when if you remember, in the streets of Italy in the middle of that outbreak in northern Italy near Bellagio, and there would be singing operettas from the balconies to thank the essential workers who were cleaning the streets. And here in Marin, we were howling. I don't exactly know why howling. I didn't quite understand the link between howling and thanking the essential workers, but that's really what it was. We were trying to say thank you to all the people who didn't have the luxury of working from home and didn't have the financial resources or the kind of job that would let you work on Zoom. So there's hardly anyone who has been untouched by the medical side of this pandemic or the emotional side, which is, of course, as always, the underreported and less paid attention to. So how has the year affected me? Same as it is everybody else. It's been a very difficult year. And maybe for me a little different because as an epidemiologist in the middle of a pandemic, it's sort of like I have a chance to do things every single day that may make a difference, or I hope they make a difference. So I have something I can do. And when we think of, what are the, major things that we think about what Judaism means to us, maybe more than any other religion, the something to do is part of being Jewish. It's tikkun olam. It's not just, let the world that is broken be healed by itself. It's you get off your butt and help to heal the broken world. I remember my first experience that was a spiritual experience, but also a social action experience was when Martin Luther King came to the University of Michigan. I was a sophomore, junior, and he spoke at an auditorium that held 3,000 people, but it was a rainy, snowy day, as Ann Arbor could be some days, and there were only a couple dozen of us that showed up, and he had us all. He looked up. The president of the university was terribly embarrassed. Martin Luther King is here. Nobody showed up. Oh my God, I'm finished. But Dr. King looked out at the audience and said, "Well, there'll be more of me to go around. Why don't you each come on all on stage and sit with me?" And what was to have been an hour talk, we stayed with him for 6 hours, 7 hours. And he spoke in a way I'd never heard anyone say, because he not only said that the arc of the moral universe was bending towards justice and that in a way it was going to be okay, he also said, and there's something for you to do in that, tikkun olam, there's something for you to do in that. He said, the arc of the moral universe will bend towards justice, but it won't bend towards justice by itself. You got to get off your ass and get out of your chair and leap up and grab that arc and bend it and twist it and pull it down towards justice, or it isn't going there. And that's I think tikkun olam for me. That's what my teacher in India taught me, Nishkam Karma Yoga, the yoga of being united with God through work in helping others without taking credit for it. That's the hardest part. And so for me, the pandemic has been a year and a half of more work than I'd done in decades, I think. I think I've worked harder and longer and been able to be part of things that have been difficult and also good. I was telling Sid before we began that the little group that we have we're working in Mongolia, which has one of the worst outbreaks of COVID in the world. Even after having 80-90% of everyone there vaccinated twice. Some of my team are working in Peru and in Bhutan, and we've been working in Hawaii and with the states and with WHO on different parts of it. more people have worked harder to help stop this pandemic and have given so much of their life to make it better. Their heroes abound. So it's been a difficult, hard year. Everybody's been touched by it. Some people have risen to a height of nobility than they never dreamed that they would. And we take our inspiration from the work that they have done, and we benefit from the work that they have done. And that melange, that, you know, that assortment of things put into a tsimis, that's what the year has been for me.
Larry, it's really incredibly wonderful to see you again. It was you were probably one of the last people I saw personally when we spent time together in Bolinas, and the 3 or 4 hours we spent together felt sort of somehow familiar in a cosmic way, like we'd all known each other for a very long time. And although as seriously as I took you, I don't think I took seriously when you said to us that day, this is just the beginning, and this is not going to be months, this is going to be years. And I really didn't have any concept of what you meant. And unfortunately, now we've all lived, 14, 15 months of that. I want to, before we get back to the pandemic, I want to backtrack because I think all of us have an origin story, and yours is a story that I've never forgotten. So it's an unfair thing to ask because we only have 50 minutes together, but if you can encapsulate how this young medical student took a journey that you probably before that year where the journey began, you never would have imagined you would have ended up where you did. Can you say a few words about how you ended up doing what you've done in your life?
um, what was that funny television series about a space detective, futurist? It unfortunately only lasted 2 years, but the byline one is it's all connected. Everything is connected to everything else. Well, I think meeting Martin Luther King was an incredible turning point for me and everybody who was on that stage that day. And none of us were ever the same, and all of us joined every one of the alphabet soup of civil rights organizations, the NAACP, SNCC, SHO, SDS, fill in the blank. And I went to medical school after that summer, and I joined a group called the Medical Committee for Human Rights. And we all, even in medical school, put on these white coats and let our stethoscopes dang ostentatiously to be sure everybody knew we were doctors. We weren't really yet doctors. And we marched with Dr. King and tried to protect him from the folks who didn't want him to complete his march. And I got arrested with Dr. King, or I think detained is the right word, because we were all put in this big enclosure in Grant Park in Chicago. We were marching, and we had Peter, Paul, and Mary singing. And I don't think you can actually call it arresting when you're there and you're with 10,000 of your best friends, and you have Peter, Paul, and Mary singing to you, and Dr. King singing Amazing Grace. That was something. But it certainly started me on a road of social activism. And I came out to California, and I did my internship here. And a group of Native Americans came and took over Alcatraz. And a woman who was part of that group wanted to deliver her baby. She was 9 months pregnant. She wanted to deliver her baby on Indian liberated land. And there was no doctor willing to go out there. And Herb Cain, who was the columnist, would write every week, is there no doctor willing to go out there? And after a while, it read like a wanted ad for, and I said, well, Larry, I've got to go out there. And I lived on the island, and I helped her deliver a baby, the first Indian in a long time, born on Indian held land. And that was 50 years ago. His name was Wovoka. And about 8 weeks ago, Veronica Garcia, who's on this call with me, my associate, she arranged a Zoom call, told me that she's going to bring a surprise onto the Zoom call, and I was going to be very happy, but she wouldn't tell me who it was. And it was Wovoka, the baby that I delivered 50 years earlier. And it was such a meaningful moment for me to think back to that occupation. But I went from being with Native Americans to joining a hippie caravan, the electric Kool-Aid acid bus, and played a part in a movie of a young doctor living in hippie buses. I was a rock doc, and we wound up driving those buses from San Francisco to Glastonbury, England. Of course, we did change buses at the ocean. And then after a last concert with Pink Floyd, we bought a couple more hippie buses and we drove from Canterbury to Kathmandu. And it took us a couple of years. But during that process, I went from being a radical activist to living with Sufis and in Buddhist vihars and Hindu temples, and every once in a while a synagogue, as we drove through Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, of course, and then we went into India, Nepal. And it was like Hesse's book, Journey to the East. And the protagonist in that book would never go and never pass a church or a mosque or a synagogue without stopping and going in and praying. And it was like that for me, that whatever the religion was in the place that we were, we tried to understand and share and celebrate it. And I wound up living in a monastery, an ashram in India, near the Himalayas, in the foothills of the Himalayas. And my guru became Neem Karoli Baba. Many of you won't know who he is, but those of you who knew Ram Dass would know that he was also Ram Dass's guru and Krishna Dass's guru and all the Das brothers' gurus. And my wife Girija and I, and it was Girija who brought me to my guru. Girija, who was Elaine Feldman before she became Girija Brilliant. I keep reminding her that is an upgrade of names, really. And we lived with our teacher, our guru, and then one day he said to me, I think Sid knows the story, I was meditating, and he would throw apples at me at very tender parts of my anatomy, and he would say, it's time for you to leave the ashram and go work for the World Health Organization. And your dharma, your destiny, is to work to help eradicate a terrible disease, smallpox. So I left the ashram. We drove down from Delhi to the World Health Organization. And I walked in and I said, I'm here. I'm supposed to work for the smallpox eradication program. Where do I sign up? And of course, they kicked me out because, I had on a white dress and long hair and a beard. And I went back up to the ashram and he said, did you get your job? And I said, no. And I laughed. I said, what a silly idea. He said, go back and, just press, return over and over again. I did that about 10 or 15 times. And each time I trimmed my beard, and eventually I got wise and I got a 3-piece suit and I went in. And ultimately I got a job working for the World Health Organization. I was the youngest person they ever hired, and I was the mascot on a team to eradicate smallpox. And Girija and I stayed in India for 10 years. And ultimately all the people who were the experts in smallpox who had taught me left to go back to their institutions, and I wound up helping to run that organization. And I saw the last case of smallpox in the world, the last case of variola major, killer smallpox. And that little girl's name was Rahima Banu, and she lived in Bangladesh. And when the scabs fell off of her and she coughed and the virus landed on the ground and the sun baked it and they died, that was the end of an unbroken chain of transmission of a disease that we know at least went back to Pharaoh Ramses V, at least 10,000 years. That pandemic lasted at least 10,000 years. Of course, it stopped being called a pandemic because people got used to it, but it didn't stop killing. It killed 500 million people, 500 million in the 20th century. And she was the last of that chain. And I often, and of course I cried when I was in front of her, and I realized how my guru could have prophesied, predicted, seen that. And to me, that is made me an optimist for the rest of my life. If a disease which only a few minutes ago was killing 5 million people a year could now not exist because of epidemiology and vaccinations and the work that it took to eradicate that disease, how could I ever again believe that anything was impossible? And so that became the defining event of my life. I think Dr. King, meeting my guru and seeing the last case of smallpox, that pretty much sums up that phase of my life anyway.
Dr. Brilliant, Larry, thank you so much. I could listen to these stories forever and continue to be inspired by them. I have had the opportunity to read your book, Sometimes Brilliant. It's absolutely wonderful. And I just want to recommend it to everybody on the call, whether you have known Dr. Brilliant from his presentations on CNN and other places, or if you've read any of his articles, to read the story is so beautiful. And I should have digitized this, but there's a beautiful picture in the book of your teacher, your guru, sitting there.
My wife. That's my wife right above him.
And your wife is right above him. Yeah, I love that photo. And I loved reading the book. And I'm just thinking about, you were talking about your guru, you were talking about Dr. Martin Luther King, and you were talking about your work as an epidemiologist, as a medical scientist. And I'm thinking about the way those things come together. You know, often we think that there's some sort of tension necessarily between spirituality and between, in Hebrew, what we call ruchaniut, the life of the soul, and science. And here you are engaged in work that is deeply scientific, the work of eradicating a pandemic, especially a disease like smallpox, that the numbers really are just staggering. And I didn't know the extent of it until I read your book and had a sense of it. And I also didn't know just how horrible and painful that experience was, and the fact that your team and the World Health Organization was able to finally eradicate something that had caused so much human suffering was an act of science. And yet it never would have happened without this act of the spirit, without your guru saying, go to the World Health, and you go multiple times. I mean, it's this incredible journey where you keep showing up again, and finally they put you to good use. And here we are dealing with this moment, and we saw some moments at the beginning of the pandemic where, you know, we heard the President of the United States saying things that were deeply not informed by science, and we heard spiritual leaders saying things that were deeply not informed by science, and sometimes even quite dangerous. So I'm wondering, for you as a person of the spirit, and as a scientist, as someone who's Jewish but who's also embraced all of the wisdom and knowledge that the world might have to offer through your guru and other teachers and your friend Ram Dass and others, how do you square those in any way, or do you feel that there's some sort of tension between the life of the spirit and the life of the mind? And if so, what is that? And if not, if somehow you've found a way to harmonize these things, maybe you could give us a little enlightenment on how you've done that.
And when I was 16, after I'd had my bar mitzvah and I was in confirmation class, the Rabbi Syme, gave us all an assignment to complete our I don't know, whatever it is that you complete in order to finish that. And the assignment that he gave was choose between God and science. And you couldn't be confirmed without finishing this essay. And I wrote an essay and I said, I choose not to choose between God and science. I choose both. And he called me into his office. He said, well, your answer is wrong. You have to redo it. You have to choose one, and I hope you'll choose God. And I said, no, you can't. You can't choose God and not choose science, because it is through the natural world that God manifests, and through the science that we begin to pare back the secrets of God. And they said, okay, well, then you're going to choose science and not God. I said, no scientist who has tried to plumb the depths of the mysteries of life can ever for a moment believe that God does not exist. How can you ever be a scientist without understanding that this is not a random universe? There is a hand that has built this. So you must believe both in God and science. So he kicked me out of confirmation class. And I remember years later, there was a conference of American rabbis in San Francisco at the Fairmont Hotel. And one of the rabbis at Rabbi Sid's Temple Emanu-El, had invited me to be the keynote speaker. And I began by all these rabbis saying, are you sure you want me here? Because I was kicked out of my confirmation class. And I told that story and they burst out laughing. And it's very, very disconcerting to see, 1,000 rabbis laughing. I just found it very disconcerting. And I said, well, why are you laughing? They said, because you're the third speaker we've had over the last 3 years who was kicked out of the confirmation class. And I just think about that lesson for me, that because someone says to you, you must choose between a life of the spirit or a material life, a life of science or a life of God, you don't have to make that choice. In fact, I think the wisest course of action is to not be forced into that choice. We couldn't have eradicated smallpox if we hadn't gathered the rabbis, but there still were rabbis in India in those days, the Buddhist monks, the Muslim imams, the Hindu priests and pujaris, and all of the different religious leaders, and brought them all together and asked for their help. Because the greatest anti-vax movement in history was in India during the smallpox program. Because in order to make the smallpox vaccine, which was the first vaccine, and so the first vaccine was named after a cow, Bacchus, because it was cowpox that was given to a little boy named Daniel Phelps in 1797, the first vaccination ever given. But to make the vaccine to stop smallpox, you had to grow this virus on the belly of a cow. And then after the virus had grown and divided and spread all through the cow died, and you had to sacrifice that animal's life in order to make the vaccine to save millions of children. And so, of course, there was a huge anti-vax movement in India, in which a cow is a sacred manifestation of God. But the choice has got to be made. And we asked all of these leaders, especially the Hindu leaders, what should we do? Should we not make the vaccine? Should we not? It was the only way to save the lives of children. And smallpox killed 1 out of every 3 people. And everybody got it if they weren't vaccinated. And the religious leaders who most of all were the protectors of cows made the decision, the most important is a human life. And so we had the support of all the religious leaders. Even in a practical way, you can't separate a religious life and a life of science. We couldn't have eradicated smallpox without the religious leaders in India.
So interesting, because what you're saying is rationality needs spirituality and spirituality needs rationality. And yet we live, of course, in a universe where, or day and age where binary choices, as the one that you were given as a confirmation student, has become the way the world works. I think the 3 of us, Sid and Yoshi and I, would all say that our favorite students are always the ones who are thrown out of confirmation class. And now we embrace those. We always say to kids, we want you to confirm what it is you believe and confirm what it is you don't believe, and then figure out what the tension is between the two, which is, I hope, a more effective way of learning. I opened up, I haven't read it yet except the first paragraph, because you just told us before that you just put out a piece in Foreign Affairs, which I commend to everyone with some reticence, because it says most countries simply don't have enough vaccines to go around. And even the lucky few with an ample supply, too many people are refusing to get the shot. As a result, the world will not reach the point where enough people are immune to stop the virus's spread before the emergence of dangerous variants, ones that are more transmissible, vaccine resistant, and even able to evade current diagnostic tests. Such super variants could bring the world back to square one. It might be 2020 all over again. And the title of the article is The Forever Virus. So why with reticence? Because in our community, we are really beginning to start living again in the way that we imagined we could. And you're an optimist, but you're also writing an article saying that this is around. Even though we want to get rid of it, it's not getting rid of us. So tell us what you mean by that, and tell us how it is that we navigate a world when we cannot bear the fact in our minds, given how wounded all of us are, of going back in to our homes again.
Well, first, we should celebrate the fact that we have vaccinated almost half of all the people in the United States, and that we're down to a handful of cases of this terrible disease every day, and the death rate has come crashing down. And so the vaccinating is working, and we have an amazing set of 3 vaccines. When I worked at Google, we would say that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If the technology is advanced enough, it will look to all of us like magic. And I think these mRNA vaccines are indistinguishable from magic. And the fact that we had them in 1 year, and we went from finding that we had a pandemic to having a global vaccination program in under 12 months is astonishing. So that's not a pessimist speaking. That's a celebrant celebrating. However, we won't have enough vaccine. We've had some problems. We had a fire in the largest vaccine production factory, which is in Pune, India, and we had depended on Indian manufactured vaccines to produce most of the vaccine for the world, as it always has been. Every year, 2/3 of all the children in the world get vaccine against childhood illnesses that are made in that factory in Pune, in India. And we've had some bumps in the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was the only vaccine made by a nonprofit that was trying to build that vaccine to give away inexpensively to countries who couldn't afford it. So we don't have enough vaccine, and we won't have enough vaccine to vaccinate the 6.5 billion of the 7.5 billion people in the world that we need. 2 doses of each would be 13 billion doses, and we're going to need to do boosters every year. So the idea of having 30 or 40 billion doses of vaccine is out of reach. That's why this is a virus that's going to be around for a long time. And as we've just seen in India, because of the heat and the speed of the outbreak, new variants were spun off. WHO now, I think correctly, doesn't want to use place names to blame countries for the origin of the disease, so we use the Greek alphabet. So it's the Delta variant that first arose in India, and that variant has now gone over the world. We have it in the United States, we have it in California, and in the United Kingdom, 2.5 months ago, there were only 10% of the cases were the Delta variant. Today, there's 90% of all the cases of the Delta variant. And the UK was about to open up again, and they've postponed that a month because this Delta variant is so rapidly transmissible. We're going to have more variants. It is the duty of a virus to replicate. If there's a prime directive that the viruses have all subscribed to, it's you will reproduce, you will reproduce, you will replicate. And with tens of billions of viruses and every person that is sick and millions of people who are sick, it's an enormous number of times that the virus replicates. And with each X number of replications, there are spelling errors. We call them mutations. And some of those spelling errors are bad for the virus. In fact, probably 95% of those spelling errors are bad for the virus. But a few are good for the virus and help it survive more. And they sometimes aggregate into what we call variants. Even then, most of the variants are bad for the virus, and only a few, a handful, we call them variants of concern. And those are the variants, the alpha, the beta, the delta, the gamma, the epsilon variant that we're dealing with. The more cases that there are, the more mutations, the more chance of a variant being a variant of concern. If we had enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody, there wouldn't be this machine that keeps on making variants of concern. But because we're not able to vaccinate everyone, we need a plan B. We need another way to stop the virus from replicating and stop and reduce the odds that these variants of concern are created. And we have lots of these options. We have the option that we use in the smallpox eradication program and stopping Ebola, ring vaccination, finding every case and putting a ring of protection around that case so it couldn't go anywhere else. We're able to do great things at finding cases and protecting people. We shouldn't be hoarding vaccine in the United States. We should be surging vaccine to India and Malaysia and Mongolia and the places that have outbreaks. We should be realizing that there's a moment in time when to do the most selfish thing in the world and the most altruistic thing in the world are the same thing now. That is to share our vaccine and to make sure that there's enough vaccine for everyone and have that vaccine be in the right place. So this article, while the title, The Forever Virus, is a bummer, a downer of a title, it's a very optimistic article because we try to lay out the things that countries can do to stop the virus from creating the variants which continue to bring us back to square one. And the response to that article has been pretty terrific. And I'm optimistic that we will, as a community, understand that if the virus lives in one country, it is able to live in all countries. And I'd say one more thing. We talked about this when we were in Bolinas. I think that, you know, after the Second World War, when we saw the skeletons coming out of Auschwitz and we saw the mushroom clouds in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the fire bombing of Dresden, all these horrible things that war and technology had brought us, the world seemed to have a silent meeting, and without talking, we all agreed that we never wanted to have that happen again. And we created the UN Security Council and the World Health Organization and Bretton Woods and the World Bank and UNICEF and UNESCO and all of these different acronyms and alphabet soup of UN agencies, and they have kept us together as a world for 70 years. And we worked together. We were able to eradicate smallpox, and we're almost eradicating polio and guinea worm, and do these great things as a world together. Well, that's not the same moment in time right now. Now we have the Putins and the Xis and the Trumps and the Dutertes and the Erdogans and the Bolsonaros. We've got these nationalists that believe that we are not all one people, believe that their country comes before humanity. And it's very difficult to organize a global campaign against COVID when nationalism is the predominant political force. Maybe nationalism at a different time is great, certainly patriotism at the right time. But now, in the middle of a pandemic, we need to be working together. We need to understand that this virus is a challenge to us understanding that literally we're all in it together. And my hope is that this experience will force us to look again at the choices that we make, at the kind of governments that we choose, the kind of representatives that we select, and the work that we do. It's not, to me, a political party issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's an issue of do you believe we're all in it together, that, you know, all men and women are created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, or don't you believe that? And I'm pleased at the number of people who are awakening to the realization that this pandemic is not just a disease, it's a challenge and an opportunity to re-examine all of those first principles.
Thank you, Larry. And I love the way that you're able to balance that type of optimism and hope with a very sober-minded analysis. I really have two questions. I wanted to ask you about strategies for helping people who might be reluctant to take the vaccine to do so. I'm going to get to that in a second, but your previous answer to Rabbi Matthew's question inspired another one in me, and I don't want to get political, so I want to divorce it from the specifics of the situation. But I'd love your thoughts as someone who's spent time in India and Pakistan, in Tibet, other parts of the world, to be sure, working on these kinds of things. Last week in the news, there were stories about the Israeli government wanting to give some vaccines that were about to expire but had not yet expired. They were about to expire and they wanted to send them to the Palestinian Authority so that they wouldn't be wasted. Now, obviously, there's a whole painful background about vaccination in the West Bank and some misinformation that went out around that, but also just some questions that got raised. And there was a joke on Saturday Night Live that was made about it. And it became a whole thing. But I'm asking, as an epidemiologist, these expiration dates, if you had vaccines that were, properly refrigerated and otherwise, is there any reason that those vaccines shouldn't have been used in the West Bank? Again, forgetting about the politics of it, I'm just wondering, as a scientist, how does that work? Because it's painful to imagine that there were people who could have gotten the vaccine, but because of politics, they didn't. I wanted to know your take on that as an epidemiologist.
Very Solomon, when we really need him, he probably would have taken 100 of the about to expire vaccines and 100 of the not yet expired and mixed them all up and randomly distributed with Palestinians and Israelis. Then we wouldn't have had this problem. It isn't the question of whether they were expired or not. The same thing occurred here in the United States when Biden was under pressure to share our vaccine, and he announced that he would share 80 million doses, but he would only share the AstraZeneca vaccine because Americans wouldn't use it because it had this tainted reputation. Angela Merkel got on television and said, "Vaccinate me with the AstraZeneca vaccine. I trust the vaccine." And when she did that, she transformed it. We need these, more than science, we need an understanding of the human spirit. If the Israelis had handled that with a different way, the outcome would have been a different issue. I don't think it's a question of whether the vaccine was good or not. Undoubtedly, the vaccine was still good.
So that then connects to my question about people who are opposed to vaccination. You dealt with that in India, and obviously it was very much connected to spirituality and religiosity and beliefs about whether the origin of the vaccine was appropriate or not from a religious point of view. And we have in our own country and around the world people who are resistant to taking the vaccine because of a conspiracy theory, because they just don't want to be poked, because they're scared of needles, because they want to give it more time. What are some of the strategies that you've found to be successful in helping to move people from a posture of not wanting to take the vaccine to a willingness to do that? You just mentioned one in terms of leadership with Angela Merkel, but are there other strategies that you've come across that you think would be helpful in our communities, Matthew and mine? I'm guessing for Matthew's community, it's not a big issue. We just did a survey for the High Holy Days asking people to share, and we were not surprised to find an enormously high percentage of our congregants have already gotten the vaccine. But how might we help message this to others, and what are strategies you have used? Because obviously we need everybody to embrace this in order to make, as you said, our own altruistic desires and our personal self-interest really do come together here. We need everyone to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. What are some good strategies for that?
I don't think I've been that successful. I have family in Eastern Ohio, and I can't tell you how many of my family, Eastern Ohio is a little bit like Kentucky and Pennsylvania, but I have many members of my family who wonder what the hell I'm doing on TV telling people to get vaccinated. Don't I know that Bill Gates has put little chips in it to control minds? I mean, I mean, they've been watching me as an epidemiologist for 50 years. I don't know what they thought my job was. And I live in Marin County, which until 5 years ago was the epicenter of the anti-vax movement. I'm afraid that I didn't do a very good job. In Marin County now, we're the most vaccinated county in the United States. We've gone from being the epicenter of the anti-vax movement to the epicenter of the vax movement. And I attribute that to a health officer here, Matt Willis, a physician epidemiologist, who just went around to every single community and enlisted community leaders and trusted leaders, you know, whether it was the Baptist minister or whether it was a local grocery shop owner in a Spanish community, and worked with them to create trust and understanding and deal with some of the historical iniquities that have occurred in some of those communities, and they have reason to be distrustful. We're now cruising over 80% vaccinated in my county. If you told me that we would be the leader of the vaccinated part of the country 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. I think it's all, you guys know that one of my best friends is a clown. And when he does a trick and he's asked, how did you do that trick? He always says, it's all done with people. I think it's all done with people. It's how do you approach this? If you are honest and transparent and people know that you are honest and transparent, when you tell them something, you're far more likely to be believed. If you're dishonest and you're not transparent, as certainly the Trump administration was, as certainly the failure that we have to identify this pandemic as a serious issue, the crazy idea of using bleach or all the ideas, I mean, the nonsense and disingenuity created or augmented an already amount of distrust in government. We now have reaped the whirlwind. But it's not just the United States. It's a phenomenon that's happening all over the world. We've got a big problem, and we wouldn't have had this pandemic had we acted quickly. We wouldn't have had 600,000 deaths in the United States. We've had hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths because of a lack of transparency and honesty. Forget about which political party it was or whatever the individual was. We've got a job ahead of us. The mRNA vaccines are phenomenal. They're also brand new. We don't have a long track record with them. They are not made in the conventional way. The first vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, was not made in the usual way of having some of the actual disease and then attenuating it, which is one way we've made vaccine in the past, you know, or getting the formula and copying it. These vaccines were literally made with a series of computer code letters that were sent by email and text. And from that, the recipe was made to make this vaccine. It is a miracle, and it's going to be the way that vaccines are made from now on in large measure. And we will find other treatments for using mRNA. I'm confident we'll find treatments for cancer. I don't know that we'll cure anything, but we'll find treatments for cancer. We'll find treatments for many other diseases. But it's so novel and so new you have to respect people's suspicion of it. We can't fight and say, well, you don't trust it. There's a reason not to trust it. I ask you, the first vaccine that was ever done in history was a doctor who specialized in cuckoo birds. And he got the idea that if he took some of the pus that occurred on the udder of a cow and it infected the finger of a milkmaid who had milked the cow, and if he took that pus and he put it in a child's arm, cut the arm and put it in, that child would be immune to smallpox. It turned out that crazy idea was right. But I don't think I would have let my child be vaccinated with something as nutty as that. I would have been wrong. So we need to talk to people who are anti-vax and respect the fact that they have reasons to be anti-vax and meet them where they are, and not be arrogant and say, if you don't get vaccinated, you're jeopardizing the lives of everybody else. And I don't think we've done a very good job. I don't think CDC's done a very good job. I don't think doctors have done a very good job in having that conversation. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about the way the anti-vax movement and some parts of other conspiracies have seemed to merge together now. I don't know how we unravel that, but the people who have been against vaccines for many years, oftentimes they have a very good reason. I may disagree with them, but we have to talk about it, and we have to treat each other differently than we have. So I don't think I've had a good track record. I have a methodology.
Well, thank you. It's a very, not surprisingly, as I'm getting to know you, just how sensitive and empathetic that response is. Matthew's gonna take us home with one final question. Rabbi Goretz, please.
Thank you. You know, I first of all, I so appreciate your empathy, because we're so full of judgment in this country and this world right now, where anything that someone else thinks that's opposite from what we think, we sort of put it up as our lives are ending and we have to destroy the other and able to bring ourselves up. So I just so appreciate your empathy. And yet I'm not sure if this is a fair question to end with, but I you know, you've been part of a lot of movements, you know, from King to India to the WHO, and here you are dealing with this. Have you ever experienced so much distrust in the societal fabric? I almost feel and wonder if that disease is equal to the pandemic, and as you alluded to, is certainly exacerbating the pandemic itself. So how do you think we go forward communally right now, when you have, as you said beautifully, but very painfully, the melding together of conspiracy, anti-vax, all this sort of, you know, they're all coming together in an axis that is so dangerous for our country. What's your sense of wisdom in terms of how we navigate through all of that?
I mean, as bad as it is, I'm not sure that it was not worse during the Vietnam era. It was just different. We're sort of divided geographically and horizontally. During Vietnam, we were divided generationally and genealogically, and parents disowned their children and children disowned their parents. And I remember absolute hatred between parents and kids that was more violent and vehement than we have even now. I don't know why these moments occur. I know that it was the kids. Remember, don't trust anybody over 30. That was not just a throwaway line. That was an ideological underpinning of a movement. I think we've been through times worse than this. It always feels worse when you're living in it this moment. And certainly we have people who profited off of the divisiveness. I'm very concerned about religious people who don't seem very religious. I'm concerned about Christians who don't seem to practice Christianity, and every other religious movement that is led by a leader who exploits, especially women, it seems like, in their following. But the divisiveness that we feel right now is serving somebody's profit, somebody's needs. And until we fully understand how it's being perpetuated and why, it's going to be very difficult. In the meantime, it doesn't hurt to remember a quote attributed to Goethe. I've subsequently learned that Goethe probably didn't say this, but I'd like to believe that Goethe did. But whoever said it, it goes like this: be kind to everyone that you meet, for each in their own way is fighting a great and noble battle. You may not know the cause or the battle they are fighting, or be able to see it, because it's not your battle. And I think that's a pretty good beginning. Be kind to everybody that you meet, because they're going through a tough time too. And maybe that opens up conversations that wouldn't have been open before. One can hope.
That's an incredibly important and beautiful message. And it was Annie Lamont, who was our first webinar, who came through, our dear friend Sid also. And Yoshi, please correct me. I'm not going to get this completely right, but she said something like, when people are in need, give them a glass of water. And don't worry about their political orientation or what philosophy they adhere to, just give them a glass of water because they're thirsty. And it seems so simplistic, but it's not, because we make it so complex. And I've been getting texts from lots of different people who are watching this, and all of them are saying we need his wisdom. So thank you. Thank you for nourishing us with your wisdom, and for sating us with a sense of measure and a sense of empathy and a sense of love that this world is in such need of right now. And we so appreciate you being with us. It makes me look forward to being with you in person again. So thank you so much for your grace and for your, again, wisdom. And for all of you who are with us, this is going to be replayed on all of our websites, and also on the different respective podcasts that our synagogues have. We are taking a break for the summer from Book of Life, and coming back to you around the holy days in different iterations. So please, for the hundreds of you on our mailing list, we'll make sure you're well informed about us coming back. We pray that this virus doesn't want to let go, that we find a way through our humane character, by the way we live and the way we operate, that we can rid ourselves of it, because it's not going to let go of us. So we pray for your health and safety, for your compassion, for your empathy, and for us to continue to write in our chapters of our books of life, so that we live the lives that we all deserve. So thank you to Dr. Brilliant, Rabbi Zweiback. Rabbi Mintz is now on her plane off to Alaska. We look forward to seeing all of you in the fall. Have a really beautiful and restful summer, and take care, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.